All right, so it's the first time that we've had a chance to meet in a while. So just do like a little bit of catch up here. And I thought maybe, Blake, if you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we can tell you a little bit about our project and what we've been doing.
Sure. I've been coding off and on as a technical analyst in different roles for 15 years or so. I have 5 years of IT consulting experience, project management experience, and I'm in between jobs. So I'm trying to stay productive and want to contribute to this project. I know about the Made tool, and I've heard of it before, and I saw what you guys were doing with other forms for legal forms. So I want to be involved in some way, constructively. So where I can fit in. If my coding skills aren't up for the task, I'm happy to test or whatever, but hopefully contribute in the best way I can.
Well, that's great. I think we have all different kinds of tasks that you could do, and I'm really interested in helping volunteers find a lot of value out of the volunteer experience, so we can find the thing that feels right for you. So
cool.
If you try something and it doesn't feel right, don't feel bad about letting us know, hey, this isn't quite the right thing that I can keep my attention and time, and we can find something else.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, so you know a little bit about our project. What we've been doing is mostly we've been working with the DocAssemble stack. We have a fair amount of custom stuff that we've been doing to try to really work on the experience for developers to be as productive and efficient and quick as possible to build new forms, and also to do it by leveraging people who just have a little bit of training. So we've got a lot of law students, for example, who had no coding experience, be able to build forms in a couple of weeks, which is great. They're not always ready and finished forms, but then we have the ability for experts to come in and help provide advice, and students at least have the ability to go in and make changes. We had a ton of volunteers over the summer, like a smaller, more student-focused crew in the fall semester. Right now, students are on break. They'll be back in about 2 to 3 weeks. So it's even more quiet times. You're seeing about our core team is probably about 8 to 10 folks. Some that are at legal aid, some that are volunteers. But Lily, a long-time volunteer, for example, at Mass Law Reform. Michelle's been working with Code for Boston for a long time as a volunteer. So all kinds of folks are welcome from different kinds of walks of life. And we, as far as the back end goes, we're mostly on Python. I think you have some experience with Python, right? That's the language.
Yeah. I've done scripting and web scraping and just utility stuff. I haven't done any applications, but I'm familiar with the syntax, and I haven't used it in a few years, but I'm sure I could pick it back up pretty quickly.
Okay. Well, a big thing that I've been working on recently, and Michelle did a lot of great work on too, is getting these new languages launched for Made. So if you're interested in that as just an entry point for testing and getting to see what the tool's like and how it works, I know that I have to go through and do in the different languages a bunch of checks to see broken URLs where the translator inserted a space where there wasn't supposed to be one. So the links don't work. So that should be a really easy thing to verify.
Sure. How many languages are we talking about?
Well, it's in the new languages. There are 5 new languages.
Okay.
There are a couple ways to do it. So the translation file is a big Excel spreadsheet. One would be to go through and just do a search for finding any places where there's a square bracket followed by space and then a parenthesis, and just check those. That would probably catch almost everything.
So you
also manually.
So just checking URLs to start with, or
and that is something I know that I noticed when I was running through, and I've pushed it live as is because still with the missing links, it's still better to have the translated version than the not translated version. There could be other kinds of testing that could happen there. Bryce is also relatively new, so he's been here for about a month. So you might have some other ideas, Bryce, for what would be a good task to get up and running started.
Yeah, I'm not sure about, at least just because I haven't done a ton of stuff with the testing. I'm sure Michelle will be willing to walk you through and like show you all the stuff about it. So I don't think that would be super hard. The only other thing off the top of my head is like maybe just like there are some small fixes in the wizard that could probably be made.
Okay.
But I don't really have anything concrete. Which I guess Claire, that was more for Quentin. Claire, for more specification, we have like Quentin was saying, like we have the tools to get to that like let sort of like non-technical people like all students get their forms up really quickly. And usually we're starting forms from like some PDF that already exists that has like is just printed out and sent into the courts. And so we have a wizard that using like some Docker simple functions goes through and like finds all of the fillable fields in the PDF. And so whenever I say wizard, we are changing the name to Weaver, I believe. So, but yeah, we'll possibly refer to either of those things. And essentially, there's just like a few like small things of like handling checkboxes, or like pairs of yes no pairs of checkboxes. I think would be a lot like useful, and stuff like that. But yeah, no, like I said, I don't have any like concrete things yet.
Okay.
I will probably try to come up with some things though.
Yeah, okay, that sounds interesting too. That's a good idea to think about, like what our issue backlog is. Blake, if you haven't been coding in Python in like a year or two, it might be a little bit harder to dive into that though, because there's so much of it's like not just Python, but it's like the way we've coded stuff and we're changing some of the things, so it will be a little bit
right.
Right. Another place where we've had volunteers is with which is more discrete Python stuff, is our court library. Trying to think if there are any open issues there. That might be a good place, which would be like editing JSON files.
Okay.
I don't know how much of that is ready to be done because I haven't looked at it in a little bit. One last idea is this project where we had some code for Boston volunteers that never quite got finished. Actually, that might be good. Which is web scraping. To get
I've done a lot of that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think a lot of it is done. What's Lily?
Sorry, I mean, the way I saw it, they have done on the Python side. What they did not do is the assembly line side. I mean, Docker assembly, which is which not Blake is able to do right now. But I mean, you're welcome to take a look. But that's my sense of it.
I think you might be right. That does sound pretty familiar to me. Okay, let me just take a look at something. Maybe we can just go through our issue list and do it quick. This is good for us anyway, since we're coming back from a break and we just finished a big task, which was coming up with a plan to reorganize our content so that it's easier for other states to adopt it. I'm just going to start with our GitHub issue list and just see what we can find there.
I was going through the GitHub list, or just about to go through the GitHub list myself.
Oh, perfect.
Because yeah, this is probably a good idea.
So,
I don't know if it makes sense for like a sort of like good intro task would be like more of like if we go through and triage this, just some more like small bug fixing tasks. So like stuff that you can chunk off and like sort of work. It would work on just like updating your Python knowledge and like figuring out sort of docassemble bit by bit. You can probably chunk things off into like the stuff that takes like half a day or a day. That would be like super simple changes of, I don't know. I feel like at least I've gone through and looked at some of these before.
That's a really good idea. Yeah. So like actually what I could do is I could drop this into the chat. So we'll start with like, and Bryce or Blake, you might just like by reading through some of these issues, get a sense of like what our project's like, the kinds of different things that we've been working on, things that look like they'd be approachable. And then we could like do another circle around and see how to help you get started with them. So you won't necessarily like just be on your own getting started with them.
We can do some study time together and stuff so that like people are just around to ask questions of.
Yeah, that's a good idea. All right. So we have, okay, and then the one other thing is the MA Courts one. Because I remember that being like pretty successful for volunteers before.
The court stuff might just require Mako and Markdown as opposed to this like doc assemble code work, really.
Yeah, let's take a look at those issues. So we have,
So it'd be less scraping and more, you know, displaying the results of the scraped data. But there might be a bunch of, depending on how refined we want to get with it, there might be a bunch of like picking and choosing from the scraped data. So parsing out the stuff that we need specifically to display. I don't know how customized we wanted to get, or if we wanted to show it
hold
just
on,
like
I think that's a little bit too much information right now, Michelle. So, but I think what you're trying to say is just like, you don't have to be a Python expert or to know our whole API to be able to do the stuff here. Just like by way of background, like this is, our court database is a bunch of JSON files. So like I see some open issues there, which are like, fix the description.
Oh,
So really just be going through and editing the text
Right.
to be right.
Okay.
That is like a place where it's been great for people to jump in, do a quick small fix, get a sense of the project, and then you can expand to more complicated things. So feel free to look at these. If they look interesting, you can like put your name on it, and we can circle back and have a follow-up discussion about the best.
Do you have how do you want me to, do you have a process where I should do that, or should I just work in Slack with you guys?
Slack is great. Yeah, when it's up and running at least.
Right. I'm just saying there's no formal tracking system or anything you need me to use, or
oh, do you have a GitHub?
Or is it informal? Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if you're working on an issue, then I would assign it yourself to it on GitHub.
Okay.
That's mostly what we've been using for things that are defects.
Okay.
We use Trello for our planning around the forms.
Okay.
We haven't been using it for the coding backend stuff.
Okay.
Is that what you were thinking about for process?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I follow the right, I don't just go do that. I mean, I want to make sure I follow the right process that you guys are following. So that's it.
Yeah, I think assigning your name to the issue would be a good process. And I'm happy to add you as a member now to our GitHub repos too.
Okay.
So let me do that. If you want me to pause the share, the recording, I can, but if otherwise, I'll just add you.
Might as well. I mean, it's not a too onerous.
Okay, so the other place that's good to start with, which is going to be really messy to dive into though, but I'll share it with you as well, is this like living coding agenda that it's a bit of a, it makes sense to us because we've been living it. That's why it's living. But it might be a little bit confusing to read through in the abstract, but I'll share this with you too, because this is kind of our roadmap for what we've been using these times to discuss and to work on.
Okay.
These meetings have been a lot of like our chance to catch up and to chat about coding, big picture things, like how we want to name things. We spent a lot of time on that in the last couple of weeks. But it's important stuff, right? Like you need to agree on your vocabulary and how you're going to structure things in order to be able to work independently the rest of the time. So it might be hard to browse this, but if you looked at it, you'd get an idea of the kinds of things that we've been talking about in these meetings.
Okay.
And that is probably, we might want to start having like I was just thinking about this, like we might want to have a more structured agenda for these meetings. Although I think it's been useful to have the really broad topics to help make sure that we can keep them to that hour. And for the meeting part. And then I think there's also been like a desire for people to be able to have just a chance for real-time discussion with coding with face-to-face rather than just over Slack. So if we want to keep that, I think we should plan that time and have it be, could even be the same block, but have it be a designated part of the time. I don't know. I was just thinking about that like sometimes our meetings have been going to as long as 2 hours, and that's really a long time to be sitting in front of a Zoom to all be discussing one thing. So before we like dive into talking about anything, I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, I'd love to talk about the various things I'm working on. There's a demo, like the flow of how I would see writing a test, like creating a variables table. I'd like to see what people think of that process. And I'm rethinking, I'm looking at multi-signature flow and seeing what can be reduced. But that is probably a longer conversation and more, it's less like project based than this particular, right? It's less like whole project based than the multi-signature flow project, right?
And I see, Lily, you added an item here, which I think that's a good meta item to have here, which is like, what are we working on?
Yeah.
Pipeline.
I actually created a file, so if we have time now, I can share it.
Okay. Any agenda items from you, Bryce?
Not too much, no. I might have one for next week, depending on how far I get to like the loading, saving stuff.
Okay. Do you want to like do, maybe we can just add that as like a discussion topic if you think there's anything for us to add as you start to dive into it.
We could at least discuss like what our conversations were about, and
That's
like
what I was thinking.
yeah.
Okay. So just reactions to this. This is kind of a subtopic. What do people think about trying to keep our meetings to an hour? Maybe just like a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. Lily, I can't see your thumb.
I think it's difficult. It depends, really.
Okay. So what are the number one things people want to get out of the time that we haven't been getting done in an hour? So I was thinking that it's just like people like to have informal face-to-face time was one thing. And I propose that if that's the thing, I propose maybe we do that as a designated chunk. It's hard to carve up too many more meetings, but I think it can't be 2 hours in a row, probably, is my feeling. But are there, is that the only, am I misunderstanding what people think?
I think it lets us have a fuller conversation about the various topics that we are like working on. Like it's less constrained by, okay, now we have to stop because the hour is up. Like there are a lot of conversations that have taken, I think there's some time wasted, and there's also some that I think have legitimately needed more time than 1 hour.
What are
I do.
Go ahead.
I think I do like the idea that informal face-to-face time is separated from the main issue discussion, because that's actually a very time-consuming, and also maybe not everyone wants to be participating.
What does informal face-to-face time mean?
What I mean by that is thinking of like, hey, you're in the office, you can run up to your colleague and tap them on the shoulder and ask like, what do you think about this? Which, when we're all on Zoom, is definitely harder to get. But it may not be, I think it's maybe onto Lily's point, like it might not be beneficial for everyone to sit in on those discussions when it's just like a thinking things through.
Maybe we could have, yeah, I hear that. I have an idea, but I'll save it for later. Okay.
And I think if we carve that part out, we actually can reduce a lot of meetings, the time for a lot of meetings, and then we don't have to say we stop at 1, it automatically will be shorter. So we may be like 10 or an hour and a half for the meeting, but that's my feeling.
Well, as I say this, I'm not sure how actionable this plan is yet, but why don't we try this? Why don't we try keeping it to an hour today? Because I think, well, I won't set a limit yet, but let's try to keep it towards about an hour and a half at the max. And then we'll just know that that's the time. And let's think about ways to get informal face-to-face time more frequently. And if anyone has like a idea or a plan for that, let's talk about it on Slack and try to act on that in the next week or two. So just so everybody knows, I think I was explaining the timing to before you got on the call, Michelle. Right now we're in still break for students. And then there's an intersession class for some students next week. Actually, Bryce, David, and I are all going to be at the Innovations in Technology Conference in the second half of the week, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, which is mostly an afternoon thing.
I forgot about that.
And then we'll start to have a new pace and schedule, like a lot like the fall semester, when students come back after Martin Luther King Day. That's just a little background. So whatever we figure out might go through a couple of shifts in the next few weeks, but I think it'll still be good for us to think about it. Okay. So Lily, I like the initiative on the project list. So why don't we start with you sharing that, and we'll try to take about 10 minutes just to look at that list and think about it.
Okay. All right, so here is from what I can remember about what is going on, who is working on what is still opening, nobody's working on. I put on the top about the repository redesign. So the decision was made after a month and a half discussion that we're going to have 6. 3 of them are new, 3 of them are just renaming. So Quentin created 1, Michelle created 2, and then for the renaming, 1 of them is on hold because we're waiting, and the other 2, I'm not sure if Michelle has done it or not, so I left it open here. So that's about the top level, the repository thing. And then coming down to the details, the PY split, that one is released. The YUM file, basic questions, Quentin is working on. And then the old wizard change, I'm done, but it's not pushed yet. This is tied with this, with the renaming, which is tied with the new main repository. And what's next? This is what Quentin told me to do, to add another file to be downloaded from the interview Weaver. So that's what I'm working on. In this process, I discovered we mainly needed to split this file because it's huge. When we'll have time, maybe not this week, maybe next week, I want to discuss what I have done, and I want to invite your comments. Now, the other things are what I'm aware of, but I may have left things out or made mistakes, whatever, but this is what I know.
And I remember, yeah, like thinking, oh, assemblyline.yaml is not the best name, but that's the one, the main file for the wizard, right? That's what when you're talking about that one on line 13?
13. This one, yeah, well, the file itself is almost like 39 lines. It's very large. When I try to go in and find where I need to make changes in order to add this extra download file, I found that, first of all, I have to understand the anatomy of this whole thing. That let me think, well, maybe we should just do what Quentin is doing to break the basic questions into different files so that each file has its own purpose.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm thinking this one is even more tricky to have everything in one file is that this file is trying to create a download. So itself is an interview, but its product is also an interview. It's like an interview embedded in another interview.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think it's probably better to break this file into separate files so that we have a file that says, okay, this one is the logic, or you set the stage for this interview weaver to work. And next one is you actually ask questions for this weaver interview itself. And the next file, maybe it's the part that is what is going to be included in the output interview, right? And then the final file would be the download of the weaver interview itself. So in other words, what Jonathan typically says, okay, we should have three YAM files in an interview. You have a logic file, you have a question file, then you have an output file. So in addition to that, I added an extra file which says, okay, this is where you include everything that's going to be included in the output download package. That way we separate the embedding, so you have a separate place for it. So basically that's what I have been thinking.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, can we add a little bit of that into the notes there on that column?
Sure. I actually have some thing I can copy to the agenda.
Okay.
But now, okay, so this is just the list of what I'm aware of. So Quentin is working on the document.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle is working on the auto testing, and then this multi-signature stuff. Bryce is working on send it to courts, right? And this one, I remember you did a demo at one of those team meetings. I put it here. And this one, I just read it today on the Slack. So
Okay.
I'm not sure the details, but I feel that's something that's going on. And then these two are the new repositories. I don't think they have been created, but there's no content in it. So it needs
okay.
to be built.
Yeah, actually, I do have some content for those. I might not have pushed it live, but up to Github, but I should.
And I think Quentin, right now, you've wanted to hold on to kind of like you'll be working on, from what I understand, the assembly line repo, the assembly line project itself repo. You're working on building those files. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically taking the basic questions YAML and splitting it up. So it's hard for multiple people to work on that, although it definitely touches on stuff other people were doing. But I think it should be ready to be. And then the one more piece that is related to this is this different way of asking the questions so that we reuse like the way we ask for someone's name, their birth date, et cetera, across different, and can customize it for something like a landlord versus a tenant versus a spouse in a family law case. So I keep thinking we should try to include that functionality in this release if we can. I don't want it to hold things up though. But that obviously ties into the way the interview weaver works and the content of those YAML files. And since that's kind of all in a little bit inchoate, that's why I've been working on it. But I don't think Lily's list here is to say like who's doing it, but are we just saying we should add my name to that, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, like putting your name on an issue, right? If it's like, if I'm thinking, well, you know, what might I doodle on in between something or other, I don't want to start working on abstracting the basic questions because you're already doing that work and that effort would be wasted.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's the effort we've already all thought through over the last couple. That's something we talked about a lot too. But that's a good idea. Maybe maybe we should add that as a separate task though on that spreadsheet.
Okay, I just oops. Where did it? Okay.
Do you mind sharing? If you shared that spreadsheet, Lily, then we
Yeah,
can.
that's what I.
Oh, that's what you were just trying to do. Sorry.
Right, that's okay.
I missed it. You were going to add it to the agenda. That's a great place for the link.
Right.
Okay. And then I'm going to add here a couple of things. So Luke was working on a way to automate identifying issues with style in YAML files.
I'm trying to put this link on it, but why doesn't it like it?
Is Luke here right now?
You know what? I should have emailed Luke too. I know he was out like last week.
He is back now.
He is back.
Do you want to email him and maybe he'll hop on? And
okay, I can try to email him. Let's see. Slack being down, man.
yeah. We need to obviously make our network a bit more robust about how we can communicate with each other. Other ways to reach out.
DM on Twitter. This works, but let's see.
Yeah, I stalked Quentin on Twitter. It's like, bet I can find this guy.
Okay, so I added it to the agenda.
Okay, great.
I'm going to add the other item that.
Oh, so I mean, I guess we could put GitHub issues on some of those at some point. That would be like a good column to add if we have the chance. And some of them don't have GitHub issues, obviously, but that may be linking to the new repository, for example, could help. But this is a good idea. Yeah, I like this as just as a check-in time. And it does make me wonder if we need to have a different project management tool for these types of projects. Which Blake, you raised a good question at the beginning of our meeting. What are we using?
For this phase, at least,
phase.
For where we're missing repositories to put issues on.
Right. And it might only be like a short-term thing because it seems like it's mostly tied to this reorganization, and then it may not be as necessary. I don't want to put on too much process that will slow us down from doing stuff, but it's good to know that we don't lose things. Okay. So yeah, can we add Luke's item to that task status review?
Please go ahead. It's open. You can do it.
Oh, okay. Let me try finding the link. Is it in today's meeting agenda?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry. Here. It's number 7.
Okay, it hasn't refreshed for me yet. I'm sure. Hold on a second. Oh, see new changes. Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
No, that was something else. It's in the agenda under 1.4 as item 7.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was sharing my screen. Sorry. Can you say it? Yeah, number 7.
Oh, it's under architecture planning.
Yeah, this is
files. Okay.
all the files.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. I just wasn't familiar with that section of the things. Okay.
Maybe good to put it in both places. Maybe I'll do that a bit later. Sometimes I remember things by like the day. I could do that. That's fine.
All right. Okay. Now I am actually typing the new item that. Where is it? Okay. Breakdown of the assembly line.yum. So I'm saying let's do it in 4 parts. So you have logic part, you have question, then you have the content. Okay, so
I think it's a good idea. Yeah, and I mean, it made me think. Oh, testing. There is.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you guys.
No problem. Here, I'll just drop a link there in the chat. So that should be all of the test interviews. If there's something missing there, then we can make sure it's installed there.
By the way, each page has an ID at the top when you're developing. So if you want to keep track of what pages you've yes, I have done this page before or whatever, that's one way to do it. We also have a testing framework we are working on building and trying out that uses Cucumber, if you're familiar with that.
And on the bottom of each screen, when you're on the test environment, each screen in an interview should have a link to submit a GitHub issue, which includes the page ID, question ID.
It's a feedback. It's a feedback link. So give feedback. It doesn't say GitHub issue. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
So.
Will I have to sign in to see that?
You do not need to sign in. No, it creates the issue using a generic account. But if you include your GitHub username in the comments, that's helpful because then we can know who submitted it.
Okay.
Enforce that. And you can use an @ just like you would normally do to mention yourself on GitHub, and then it will be linked in the issue that's created. Okay. Well,
maybe if I need someone to walk me through that, should I just reach out to you, Quentin? Or
you can probably ping me.
ping you? Okay.
And Michelle, you are Michelle on the Slack. I was just saying, I get confused about. I was trying to find your email, and I was like, which email address would I have saved from which variation of Michelle's contact information? But
which
and then
in my life.
My email's only kept for a year at GBLS, which was the first place I was looking. So, I mean, I could get it from the archive, but I didn't have time to do that. Anyway. All right, so I think this is great to have that little preview. Let's see, looking down our list. I know that the testing, the structuring multi-segment, we spent a fair amount of time on that the last time we met.
The question
is about to start something new. So I want to try to get to both of them, but can we maybe start with giving Bryce a little bit of a start with the saving and loading data, and then we'll come
to the testing. Okay. Just
hey, Luke.
Quickly. Hey, guys.
Sorry, I was realizing I was trying to send out emails to folks because Slack is down, and I should have included you on that email loop. Sorry. But good to see you. How was your break?
It was nice. It was really nice. Just relax a little, spend time with family. How was everyone else's?
Good. Good. I also tried to relax. Michelle made a lot of GitHub issues.
I'm sorry. I forget that everybody still looks at their notifications because I've stopped looking there, but still gets notified. So sorry about that.
I didn't mean to answer for you. That was just a joke. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I was having a blast. I was trying to follow up on things I had meant to follow up on, and made some progress there. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, yeah, welcome back, everybody. So
yeah,
Luke,
data loading stuff.
Yeah, let's just give that a little bit of time. We talked about it a lot in these meetings. We have that document. And Bryce, I went over it with you independently a little bit. But do you want to just set the stage? I think it's good to restate the issue and the goals, and then we can go through where things that you are thinking you might want guidance on.
Yeah, so I think mostly, so the only sort of new things that I can talk about is I had some conversations with Michelle about sort of how to actually start this and what this would be used for last week, which sort of helps to clarify goals and stuff. So there are a few, essentially this main idea is that we have someone's going through an interview. At any point, they can save the some representation of the interview so far, and be able to do a lot of different things with it. In some cases, we're it's sort of maybe farther off, but if you went to save this particular results from this particular interview and use it in a completely different server, or sort of just like move your information to someone else who's hosting the same interview, you can do that. If you want to save all of your sort of answers so far and re-upload them, or save all your answers so far, sort of edit them locally, or sort of make some small changes then and then upload them again. Or sort of for testers, if you want to fill in, like have, like this is a scenario you're doing, you fill out that scenario and like all of the addresses and whatnot, you save it, and then anyone else who's sort of testing that scenario can upload from that point, so they don't have to waste 10 minutes getting to that specific point each time. And so those are sort of like all of the different goals, but they seem to like there seems to be a decent amount of feature creep whenever we talk about this, in terms of like, well, we wanted to do X, Y, Z, and there's just a lot of different things. I'm realizing I should be screen sharing the specific part of the document that I am reading, sort of like looking at. I sent the link in the chat, but yeah. So this is the specific part, which is sort of everything else was sort of there and stuff. But this is sort of my conversations with Michelle about it. And so, yeah, essentially, I think we just need to sort of clarify what we want to either focus on first, or sort of like as or like what are the ultimate goals from sort of for this particular like saving and loading stuff, because there are some parts that are like essentially like there's throughout the rest of this document, there's like all the different sort of approaches we could take, which are all like useful and very good to have, but sort of like each of these different approaches are very different, and trying to like satisfy all of these different use cases just isn't going to work with one approach. Like we're going to have to take multiple approaches, and sort of what we want to focus on mainly is what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could probably like look at this document as kind of like a brainstorming document, and probably we didn't go back through and say what is our actual goal that we're trying to solve first. So that's really fair.
Mm-hmm. And I think what Michelle and I sort of like, I don't know, Michelle, feel free to chime in whenever but I feel like at least the main thing that I got from our conversations was that there's like the biggest difference in all of these different solutions is either some sort of structured format that we're exporting, like, or saving to like in some sort of like database-ish format, versus like a more unstructured format, which would be like whatever data or like variables that the interview has set so far, we save those and then it'll work the next time. And there's like no guarantee, and it might work the next time, it might not, depending on how many changes have been made for interviews, or like to the interview. And so that's sort of like the main shift, and that's like I think just the biggest, like whatever like within those two options will have some flexibility, but just like those two shifts, meaning like if things are essentially like if things are unstructured, it will kind of work, but there's not going to be any sort of guarantee that things will stay the same, especially if you're like changing to a different version of the interview, or like you're still updating the interview. And so it's sort of like quick testing, or not quick testing, but more of like there's not a lot of longevity to the the actual like saved data file, and there's not a ton of integrity. It's more of here's sort of a copy of what you have. Like there's no guarantee it's going to work next time. Versus if we want things to be more structured when we download them, which is better in terms of like if you wanted to have like if this is part of like a long-term automated test and you want this to always be able to upload and go to the same spot in the interview, then it'll sort of just work. And that sort of makes it a little bit easier to like interoperate with other interviews. I think one of the things probably more longer term is being able to download this data and use it in like a separate hot docs or like A to J author, which are just different platforms all doing the same interview process. Like sort of, yeah.
So
sorry,
the-
sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
just to give a kind of concrete example of that, something with more rigid data is saying, okay, we're going to record the name, the address, the birth date. Like we know the information that we have control over, and we can build that in a modular way so that it can be extended either by other developers and other plugins or by us later. So we can make that library of things that we record more extensive, but that would keep, that's what more rigid, that's the kind of thing more rigid might mean.
Thanks. That's a good clarification. So
Thanks, Michelle.
yeah, I don't know that like we have to try to solve it. It's a really good question. It's like, so what's the use case we want to solve first? So to me, I mean, I've done a lot of development in hot docs, which does have this save file format, and I've run into issues that you were kind of previewing, Bryce, where you have you've made changes to the interview, and when you load information, it might produce an unexpected state, right? With that limit, I think that's still like the most useful way for us to go, because it will solve a lot of problems pretty well. In my experience, like it makes it really fast to test changes to an interview. One big difference is hot docs is nonlinear, whereas we'll have to figure out some way to reproduce some of the features of that in this loading process, I think. I'm thinking like maybe you could say, just show someone like a really quick and dirty, like here are all the interview answers. Like, do you want to edit any of them before we load them? Perhaps, if that's reasonable to do, depending on the format of the information that comes in.
I think if we're talking about something that's flexible enough.
Hold on, don't interrupt
Okay.
me first, please. But I think that like once we've solved those problems, the idea of being able to generally load anything that we haven't predetermined is going to be loaded is going to end up just being really helpful for us in the long run. And then if we then try to solve those problems that are that we encounter with that, like separately. So what's the things that you do? Like you might end up manually doing something or rebuilding a save file that one time, right? Once the interview is loaded. Or you, in hot docs all the time, like you're writing like little shims, which don't be needed. They're not needed that often if you've done a good job of planning your interview, your file names, your variable names rather up front. But sometimes you need to like say, oh, okay, when you load this, if it's been loaded after this date, change this variable or copy the information from this variable to this new variable name. It's like, that actually doesn't come up very often in my experience, but it does every once in a while. And that's how you solve it in the interview itself, not in the save format.
I see.
And then I think from there, like if that's like the goal that we're trying to approach, like I think there's a sub goal, which I think Michelle probably talked with you a lot about, which is the testing. But I don't think we should change the save format or our first.
We didn't talk about the testing.
Okay. So just knowing that was what you were asking about on Slack. So that's what I was assuming. I don't think we need to over optimize for that use case is what I should say. What I'm thinking is like, this is a way for someone who's developing an interview actively to just quickly load, like do the fast forward is a kind of like one of the main use cases. It's more about the informal testing. And then if we needed to develop a more structured format for automated testing, and it could reuse some of this work, that would be great. But it would be totally okay for that just to be its own way of specifying those variables for that use, rather than using the saved file. Because that is like, that's a very structured, rigid process anyway. So like asking someone, okay, take this and write it its own special way for your test that's going to run again and again and again isn't really that big of a burden, I think.
Gotcha. That sounds good. So yeah, I don't want to take too long, but those are just sort of the main main things we were talking about. I think, yeah, I guess that's at least I think a good enough push to sort of lean towards more rapid iteration and early stage development stuff as opposed to anything else. Yeah. Sorry.
And then I think something to think about is like, how do we create something like a review screen automatically when you're doing the loading? Because I think that might be helpful, but it might be okay just to say, go and edit the JSON file. That might be fine for that situation. And at least we could build that as a second thing. It doesn't have to be done before, as long as there's the ability for someone to edit the JSON file. One other thing I was thinking about related to this is, I think it really is mostly about people who are doing development to be able to load and see like, well, what happens when I used my answer file that has 5 children and they claim this defense and this defense and this defense. Does it still work? Because we have this function in docassemble that lets you copy an exact fidelity set of a session to a new or existing session. So
we have a clone session?
Yep. Yeah, there's a clone basically that already exists. So like that would be for the normal situation where like, hey, you have one user who wants to get their information from the one family law interview to their second family law interview. That's the follow-up on the first one. That doesn't really require exporting it to JSON and then importing it back, because there's a perfect fidelity way to do that already.
Isn't that, I mean, it sounds like a really great way for a developer to just, as long as there's a review screen that they build for their interview, then that is, sounds like a great method for uploading, right? For like downloading and up, or like for the use case we're describing, right? Because they then edit and they see if that works with the new thing. They already have all the data in there.
It is, it does also solve a lot of that use case. You're right. I don't think it's solves the same thing as having a file that you can download and then move around from server to server.
Because you can't move it between servers is the issue with that method?
That's the biggest difference, yeah.
Okay.
It's not portable in any way. It's just adding a new row or rows, maybe even. Not sure how it works when you copy a session to the database, which is like this encrypted, pickled data, which is incomprehensible. And it's also platform dependent, like it depends on specific versions of things being installed. I think this is the kind of thing that a lot of people ask for like the first time they use docassemble. And I feel like it's worth us like experimenting with it. I mean, I also like the idea of you being able to download the file and just change stuff when you've got it most of the way done, especially if you have a longer interview. So you have the one copy that you downloaded, you tweaked, and then it can serve like a bunch of purposes without having to change everything and run it manually from start to finish. But if we want to just start out by experimenting and solving the problem with just the cloning sessions, we could start with that. But I just think this has a lot of value. It's something a lot of people have been interested in. Doesn't guarantee it's valuable, but I can certainly see uses for it.
Okay, cool. Okay. That sounds good. I don't want to take up too long because I know we had other things. But just wanted to relay that.
Okay. Luke, we skipped you a little bit because you didn't get the link to join. Let's take till 12:30 and have a hard stop at 12:30. Michelle, are you all right if we jump to just checking in with Luke before we go to testing again?
Sure.
Okay. Luke, is there anything
Thanks.
that you wanted to talk about there with
I don't think there's too much for me to talk about. Like, I kind of have to get back into the work. I haven't started with that thing I was going to work on. Could you, I think I'll start today. So either you can link me that Google Sheets or whatever, where you had the progress of different people on projects. You can put in progress for me, or you can just link it and I can update my own progress. Yeah, I don't think I have too much. Hopefully I'll be able to get some work done this week, and then maybe next week come with maybe some more questions and things to talk about. But yeah, I don't really have too much. I haven't done much work recently.
It was vacation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I wasn't
What
expecting.
vacations are for. Just
And
if
I
there
was
was
also
something
expecting
burning on your
probably-
mind, then
No, I think
I was
I'm
also
okay.
expecting we might have like another like pre-project check-in. So if there's any questions that you already think you have or that you want to get
Mhm.
started, just like we're doing for Bryce, we could use a little time now.
Yeah, I think I'm okay, but I will look at it and maybe I'll have something. Is there going to be the regular Tuesday meeting tomorrow?
Yep, there will be.
Okay, so maybe if I have something for that,
Okay. Yeah, and I just like the recap was, I think like there we were going to do some basically like linting to our style guide essentially. So checking for things like, is the question more than 80 characters line long or something? That kind of thing would be an easy thing to start with. All right, so Michelle, which of these topics did you want to talk about first?
So one big summary, if we're not, I mean, depending on how much time we have left and what people want to discuss, is trying to figure out if the testing framework as it currently is able to be built is worth pursuing right now. Because is it, but what I wanted to say was that Caroline and I, she wants to try out the testing framework for the work she's doing right now. So that gives me a place to find out whether it's actually usable in kind of the format that it is. Like you've said, something automatic that just automatically generates tests given the code of an interview or maybe the code of a live interview, either a running one or whatever, that would be great. But that's not something that I can work on right now, which is fine. But then if that's the only way that's going to work, then I would switch to concentrating on other stuff for a while so that I can come back to that when it is the appropriate time. So Carolyn and I can try that out. In doing that though, I've worked out a process for identifying the variables that, like for a human to go through and use that object in an interview to help them decide which variables to set. And I don't know, before the people, I mean, there's a few more people in the room now, but the people in the room were the people that would be using it. I wanted your opinion on your take on whether that is a reasonable process for you personally. But it seems like that is not what we want to do right now because we're doing, I don't exactly know which things are what kind of fall into what kind of category. So
well, I think we're gonna stick here until 12:30, and I know that I also said we were trying to stick to an hour when we can. So if anyone wants to sign off, don't feel bad about signing off too. So sounds like we have about a half hour to talk about the two topics that you'd raised. So is there can you phrase that as a question, Michelle?
If I show you this methodology for identifying the variables that you might want to put into a variable table and their values, would that be a process that you would do as a developer? It would, yeah, I can explain it more later, but.
Okay, so maybe I could try restating it because I maybe people have the context because we had this discussion on Slack a little bit. So this idea is in your cucumber test, letting someone just say, here's a list of all the variables I want to set. Here's a list of the values that they should have, and let the interview navigate to the end without you having to say screen by screen, click this button, click this button, click this button, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And your question is like the exact syntax for how the developer
No.
should write that?
No, I'm saying that I looked at the object, but like one of the things is, okay, so I have to go through, as a developer writing this test, I have to go through and I need to identify, okay, what variables do I want to set? What values do I want to give them? And then I'm going to have to go through troubleshooting because maybe I've forgotten a variable here and there, etc. Right? So from what I understand, the prospect of that is part of what is obstructive to the idea of writing these tests. And if that is the case, then the way that I have gone about it might be useful. It would be useful to know if, because I have actually gone through it and have like seen a methodology that I think seems reasonable. I want to understand if that does feel like a reasonable methodology to other developers and whether that methodology would be usable to use a testing framework as it is now.
And are you describing an algorithm, Michelle, or are you talking about like
Nope.
an automated process?
I'm talking about a manual process that the
That's what I mean
developer
by
would do.
algorithm. Sorry.
Algorithm? Okay.
Can
Well,
I-
I'm describing a human algorithm. Sure. Go ahead, Lily.
Okay. I think I am a little confused. The last time when we talked about this tool, I thought we asked the question: is this tool going to be used during the development of the interview process, or is it used after it's developed, after the interview has been completed?
So this is a bit
after, right? So
yeah,
then
this is a bit separate from that question. This is a different question.
I think Lily's
Then-
getting to her.
then
Okay.
I heard what Bryce was describing what he was doing. So that made me think of the answer file that was used in hot docs, where if you run your own interviews, you have answered the questions, so the questions have been saved into somewhere, and if you want to just quickly rerun your interview, you can bring up that answer file and you don't have to re-enter the answers. So that actually can be very helpful for people who are doing this kind of testing during their process. So that enhanced my impression that the automatic testing tool would be used after the interview is developed. And given that, then to me, I'm thinking, do we want to put people through this process of looking at each field and look at all the values that can be used for each field, because that can be a long process. So that's where I get kind of fuzzy. I don't know.
So wherever it is people are going to test, whether it's during development or after development, right? What I'm saying is, I think none of us currently have, well, I have a little bit of an idea having tried it before. None of us currently, fully understand what the process is for writing the test. Like, how would you do you have to go page by page and look at every variable and then decide what value it is you want for it? Like, the process for actually writing the test. It's been expressed that the process of writing the test manually as a developer is too onerous for a developer to pursue. And so, or that's how it has seemed to me, that without a completely automated system, it's not really feasible to do this testing framework. And that may be the case. I wanted to see if this particular workflow that I have seen is something that would work for making it feasible. And if not, then I think it is a good sign that this particular project should be put on hold for a while and developed further when there are more tools to develop it with.
So you want a demo for us to process?
Yes, or just get the feedback that now is not the time to develop this testing process.
I mean, I can see Lily's point is like that loading answers has an overlap with automated tests. I think it does, but I think it's
yeah.
different because in some ways, depending on how structured those tests are versus loading the answer file, which is just a bunch of jumbled up variables and like an where the order probably doesn't matter in that file. I think it's going to be alphabetized, for example.
The order doesn't, I mean, you could load up one of those files with the test if you provide them in your folders. Right. So like, I think, I mean, there's another way to go about it where you just have files in your repository, interview files that have all the variables that you need set. I don't know, like there's lots of different ways to do it, but
yeah, I think it's still like, I think it's definitely valuable to have. I mean, I've had, and the other thing is those tests, well, as you're saying, keep the automated tests, but just maybe base them, start on saved answers if we end up going that way.
Well, what I'm saying is that if people aren't going to write the test with any methodology as it is now, right? If the testing framework as it is now, people are not going to write the tests, that isn't super useful. Whether it is as, during development or whether it's after development for regression testing, if people aren't actually going to write them, then it's not a useful framework to work on until we have a way to write them that will be useful. And the data loading might be a way we get to that, and it might not, but like I don't currently, I mean, that's going to take like a heck of a lot more work. So, I mean, I'd need to, I don't know. I think we definitely benefit from some feasibility testing there and like some really good identification of the behavior that we want. And how it can be achieved. But so I think that the data loading, the work with data loading and saving and whatever would be very informative. And
can we get to the actionable part, Michelle? Sorry, I know this is good background, but
okay. So are the tests, I can show you that methodology. It sounds like maybe people aren't interested in that, and that's fine. But if we're not going to do the demonstration, then just straight up answer, is the testing framework as it is now usable for developers?
My feeling is that, I think I've said this a few times during the past discussions, that if the process itself, writing a test, that process itself, if it's straightforward, painless, you would get more people willing to do it. But how do we achieve that? That's a separate question. Now, you did mention that someone like Karen is willing to give it a try. So maybe wait a bit and see what her feedback is when she writes it and how she feels it. If she feels it's not big deal, she's willing to do it, maybe that's some kind of indication that it won't be too painful. I mean, right now we are talking just from one side. We needed to listen to from the other side, where when people actually have to do it, how do they feel? Do they feel it's worth it, or do they like it?
Right. So,
you know.
So what I was hoping was to show a way to do it and see how people felt about that. But it sounds like that is not what people want to do today, and that's okay. So I will work with Caroline. That sounds good.
I was gonna say I'm interested in seeing it, but if other people don't want to see it, that's fine.
Me too. I was also gonna say, like, I feel like at least seeing what it is would at least be useful in determining whether or not people could do it.
Yeah, I think no one's really tried it. So if it's something you can demo to us in like 5 minutes, then get feedback on, that seems valuable to me.
Okay.
So none of us can really say like, hey, should we do this? Is it too hard or too easy? Because you've just kind of been doing it. So no one else has tried it.
I know, but I'm offering to demo it. That's like my offer here.
So is it something that we can demo in about 5 minutes, do you think? And
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
So hang on, let me make a file that will generate. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And this is loading this is the AL documents, but it's just an example of variables. So I'm going to do, oh, not, yeah. You do your interview, you get to whatever point it is you want. You look at the variables, you copy all the variables. Oh, I need to do a new share with here. Paste the variables. You know that variables is all you want. Get rid of that. You know that you don't want internals, so you get rid of that. Then you identify the variables it is you do want. So you want age, and you have to know enough about this. You don't want court bundle because court bundle is something that is created for you. You don't want cover page, that's created for you. You want these. You want field 4, and that's a list of something. So I think you'd want field 4, 0 dot, I think so. I think that's what you'd want. Though correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to minimize that because I don't. Minor release, you don't want that because that's blah, blah, people. You want people. So you'd say people, and it's a list. So I might define people 0 dot long, address long, birth date, height. I think there was one other thing. Name. Well, I'll copy it like that. And would make it like this. This is how you would determine which variables. Well, I'll leave that right now. People, I think, is done. Template 2 is something I'm not saving, and neither is URL args. So blah, blah, blah. And then depending on, you'd have to know the testing framework. And you all don't know the testing framework, but this basically gives you the information you need in order to be able to make the variable table. So you would do that for your variables. You'd need to know your variables. And that's what the process would be. Yeah, it's already here. That's fine. Oh, then the end one. So that is the process for setting the variables. You'd have to decide on your values. You'd need to know about the testing framework. So you need to know what syntax to use here, though these might turn into sentences because Quentin's brought that up as a desire. I'm not trying to say, I hope you all understand how the testing framework works now. I'm trying to say that process was how I decided what variables to set for my test, right? These are the variables, whatever values, I can figure that out later. But these are the variables that I want to set for my test. And that is the process and methodology that I am trying to model to see what that feels like to other people.
my opinion of this is that it doesn't actually seem too hard. And it's mostly like the hardest thing I see thinking about it is sort of like knowing, like being able to go through and knowing like, okay, I care about this variable, I don't care about this variable, which I assume if someone has been working on the interview and like actively developing it, then that wouldn't be a hard point for them. And then my other second note is that this is arguably really looks like sort of just a manual version of what data loading and saving would be. And so I think it's definitely a useful. Yeah, like it looks really close. It's just you have to.
There's some stuff about what you'd have to like evaluate and how we would choose to evaluate. But that's we can talk about that more because
Then that would be perfect. That would be perfect. So you two can somehow collaborate. Maybe Bryce doesn't have to do it directly, but if you inform Michelle how your things works in principle, then you two can connect at some point, and then if this step can be automated, there's no pain. Everybody would love it.
It doesn't quite work. There's complications here that like I've dug into this a bit, and maybe there's a way to do it that I'm like less aware of, and I would love to hear that. But right now but it's a good question, and Bryce and I can discuss it more, and that would be great. But right now I'm asking, like, if you had to do this process manually, just as I showed it, is this a process you would do in order to get a test up and running? And it would be, if this was the basic variables for your interview complete, I mean, you wouldn't have to do this very many times to get the full list of variables that you need for your interview, and then you can adjust from there.
The only thing I'm wondering, because this isn't showing the test, right? This is just one piece of it.
This is showing the process for getting the variables, right? So
by variables in this case, do you mean the setup variables? Like if like a test itself is going to like have some sort of like requirements or stuff that it's already set up, and then the actual test will happen of like going through and selecting different parts and then the expected part. And then you have like your checking either just that you can get to a certain page or that you have other expected variables. Is when you say variables, do you mean the setup or do you mean the test itself?
So this is the scenario. You are saying this test will set these values when it comes across them in the code.
Okay.
Right. So this is part of this, the test and part of the setup. It really depends. That vocabulary is kind of loaded in this
okay.
Because like the setup versus the scenario versus the background versus the like, there are different ways to think about it.
Yeah.
But this would be the scenario that you would be testing if the person's age is 12, right? So try setting the person's age to 12, try setting field whatever to something, right? So there's syntax in the test, but I think that this is the most onerous part of the process. If you were the way I was doing it before, going page by page and trying to identify one variable at a time. Okay, what's the value for this variable? What are the options? This is, to me, much less painful than the prospect of trying to go through my code and find all the variables, or trying to go question by question and find all the variables.
So the basic idea is like, yeah, just starting with the save file. That's the versus going through some other way. The show variables and values page, I suppose.
Yeah.
And basically this test runs through, and it, like on every page, it just scans and says, is one of these fields here? If so, set it to this value, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do get something that's separate from the data loading, which the data loading would happen in Python. And this is going to happen interactively on the web browser. So you catch bugs with like show ifs and stuff.
So
I assume.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, I mean, if something doesn't get shown, or and then it doesn't get set, then you will get a problem, right? But it will, if something is revealed, it will set the show if as well. Like it will interact with it like a person.
But if like the input's there, but it's hidden, it doesn't set a hidden input.
No, it won't set a hidden input.
Okay. Yeah,
And there
so
are reports like we're going to set up a report. If this is something people will use, we'll set up a report that tells you what variables were not set at the end.
Okay.
So where you got to the end and actually none of these were triggered or whatever. The question again, just to kind of refocus, is does this seem like a reasonable workflow for you as a developer to say, this cuts out enough of the work I potentially saw that this is a thing I would use this framework to write tests in this way? Like,
I think we probably don't have enough information to answer that honestly, because none of us have tried it yet. And we're also not seeing the whole test here. And so like this pain point that you encountered isn't one we even knew existed or had thought about before, probably. So it wasn't probably the barrier for anyone running a test. But
okay.
this piece looks, relatively straightforward as you're reading it here.
Sure.
I think you're not going to really get like accurate feedback until you've tried it. And since Caroline's volunteering, I would say definitely do that.
Sure. Okay. Sounds good.
Definitely has value. I mean, like and if we're only testing like loading stuff in the Python, we're not really testing to see if things work. So as much as a lot of people don't like writing tests, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do them.
I know, but it was sounding to me like the process of manually writing the tests wasn't one that people were finding feasible, like that people would actually go through. And if people aren't using it, it's great to write a testing framework, but I'd rather spend time on things people are actually going to use. So,
Sure.
I mean, it's a great goal to have. And I think obviously that testing is very important. But I also am not going to write all the tests. So if people other than me are not going to use the tool, then I would prefer to put time into other things until data object or whatever, until we've figured out what that's going to look like, et cetera.
I think, sorry, I think it seems feasible to do what you demoed. It doesn't seem incredibly hard. I think the only thing is like maybe missing a variable or not putting something in that should be in there. But besides that, I just want to see, I think what Quindon was saying, the whole process, like do that and then what comes next, just to see like,
sure.
What the whole testing process is like. But I think
you and I can
feasible.
check it out on the interview we're doing now, whatever it's called, motion to modify 209A.
Yeah.
Shot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying, Michelle, too, but I want to make sure like that you're doing stuff that people are using. So, and I will also say, like, if you're feeling like you want to do another project, you should totally make sure you're doing things that you find are valuable. So obviously,
I would find this
as a goal. So
I would find this incredibly valuable if it was going to be used. Like, so maybe that means I should be doing something else. I don't know, but yeah, I hear that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, it does make me think, like, do we need to, I don't know that we need to wait for the data loading stuff, or if it will definitely inform you if what you're doing is that process you just showed, because
I might be able to automate it.
Just do it from parsing that JSON file. And maybe like the way I would think about doing it would be with like a deny list. Like you identified variables you don't want to use. So probably true for most interviews, there's a standard set of things you don't want to include from the save file.
Yeah, but it gets,
you would want to customize. So just having a deny list approach.
Yeah, but it becomes complicated. Like it can't be so permissive. Like it needs to be. It's gonna have a lot of growing pains and a lot of like just identifying those things. Because, for example, I picked out the keys or attributes or whatever that were useful, and there's no way for the code to be like, okay, these ones are useful, other than going Well, these are all the ones that docassemble gives, and maybe sometimes a developer will assign that value as well. So you can't always ignore it, but you can ignore it in these cases. Also, they've made custom classes that have their own values that you also don't need those. But you know, like it becomes very.
Yeah, you end up having. You start with something automated, and then like there's always refining. So
it's just a whole. It's a whole. It's not
Fine.
like a one and done type of thing.
No,
it's
certainly.
It's pretty involved process, and I'm not convinced yet that this is viable as a tool as a framework for people to use to test. So to put all that work in when there's not even an idea that people are going to use this is a little. It's a bit of a turnoff. So like, you know.
Well, let's say we could get to this. Like you finish your interview, you generate a saved file, and you could get from there to like one click to this still works when I hit commit on GitHub. That would be.
I mean, that sounds fantastic, but I'm saying if you have to go through a different
people
process,
would do that. That's all.
Would people go through the other process? Would people go through a process that takes more work than just I click and, you know, I never have to write a test and it automatically happens?
Yeah, I mean, of course, and but the closer we get to that, the more likely people are to use it. But I hear what you're saying. I don't know the answer. I don't know. And I guess we have some proof in that you're the only one who's written these tests so far. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be like pushing people to do that if they haven't been, because it clearly has a lot of value. I don't know. We used to do all those tests for MAID, for example, like that I think had a really obvious payoff in time saving, unless you spent like way more time on it than.
Nope, the tests found it. The tests found it. It was great. Once the tests are written, great, right? That's great. But who's writing the tests? I want to see that people are going to use tests in a situation where it's not completely smooth and automated, because I am just not people are very bad at writing documentation and writing tests. I am as well. I'm bad at both those things. If I can't make a fully automated system, like, then will people, or I can work on a fully automated system, but I don't see how I can get there. I can work on it.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. All right, well, I definitely had promised people we would end at 12:30, so we didn't get time to talk about the second question that you had, but I think we could save some time on Slack or set up a meeting or.
That's a whole other thing. That's a whole.
Yeah, we definitely can't start that now at -1 minute. But all right. Great to see everybody again. Blake, you're welcome to come again tomorrow if you want to meet more of the team. That's the less technical side, and or any time. So,
okay.
And I will see everybody else tomorrow.
All right. Tomorrow.
Bye.
Oh, does anybody, Blake or Bryce or Luke, since we don't, since we don't have Slack right now, or do we have Slack? Is it back yet?
The Slack outage page or the Slack status page still says it's out. So
do we want to figure out another way that we can communicate? Like, because that would be useful to me.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. I would say I think it's okay for people to have, in my opinion, to have like a little bit of quiet work time independently. Is there a chat?
Well, if you can stop recording, I will put my email in the Slack or in the chat.
I think we've exceeded the recordable part here.